now is Will Chamberlain from the Article 3 Project. Will, this is something that it's truly remarkable to me that, actually, I had told you we were going to start with the Supreme Court, but I lied. So I want to start with Alvin Bragg. Because, and just take it all back from a second, that there is the legal case, right, with Alvin Bragg, and yet there's also the effect of the legal case. And the effect of the legal case is that Donald Trump, who is the current president or current leading presidential candidate in the United States, so CNN has the poll, he's number one head on head and number one by a lot in the three-way split or four-way split when you add in third parties. And yet he's been removed from the campaign trail by lawfare, removed by state force. Why are the Democrats so good at this, Will?
Well, I mean, first off, they're ruthless, right? Like, we start there. Yes. Democrats are fundamentally ruthless as a political party. And this is something this is not a new phenomenon. Democrats have been ruthless for a very long time, especially when it comes to the law and the judges and everything else. I mean, I can think of, Miguel Estrada. Let's take, that's a really interesting example of, a guy who was totally qualified for the Supreme Court, was nominated for the D.C. Circuit. Democrats knew that he would be an outstanding candidate, knew he was an outstanding judge, knew he met all the qualifications, and ruined him to the point that his wife ultimately committed suicide by putting him through the worst confirmation hearing we've ever seen. And why? Because they wanted to be the first people to appoint a Latina or a Latino Supreme Court justice. So that's what they do.
It's incredible. So what's interesting to me is that, and I read Jonathan Turley's great piece on the Alvin Bragg. Alvin Bragg's like actual theory of the case, which is something that, it doesn't seem like it gets actual much play in the press or even in the courtroom with Donald Trump right now, because he's got this and this is where, and I just asked our last guest, Mark, who's an attorney, but it wasn't really the subject. I just asked him what he thought of it, and he said he couldn't even make sense of it. I'm sitting here as a layperson trying to make sense of, there's a misdemeanor to cover up a misdemeanor, which they claim, which somehow transforms it into a felony, even though the law that supposedly was covered up is a federal law, and the federal government doesn't seem to care about any of this, but he's just going to go ahead and prosecute it as if he was law enforcement at the federal level, and yet in the courtroom we're not being told anything about this theory. Instead, we're being told about his alleged sex life with these models and striptease artists and this catch and kill stuff with David Pecker. But what is the actual theory, and have you ever seen anything like this?
Well, I mean, you actually described the theory fairly well. The idea is that he made a false entry in his business records, or had a false entry made relating to a payment that was ultimately routed to David Pecker for the purchase of Stormy Daniels' the rights to Stormy Daniels' story. And the theory is that that's somehow a campaign finance violation, because somehow, even though ultimately it's him donating the money to himself. I mean, that's the bizarre part of this. I don't actually get what the campaign finance violation truly is here. But it's a very, very bizarre theory. And what I think that Alvin Bragg and his team are trying to do is not to persuade the jury that, the elements of a crime have been satisfied and Donald Trump is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but rather that Donald Trump is an extremely bad man and therefore the bad man should go to jail. But that's not how our criminal justice system works.
Right. So, and unfortunately, with a case like this, I was saying here in some of the conferences I've been at that, there's no way you can have a fair jury in a place where you have a massive political figure like this, and the jury pool is like 90% Democrats. I said the only way you could really have a fair trial is if you did a third, and maybe have, a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third independent or something like that. But of course, that's not how we pick juries in the United States, though perhaps something for Congress to think about when it comes to D.C. juries in the future. But so essentially, it doesn't matter because they know they've got a bunch of Dems up there. They've got a bunch of libs, and they're going to vote again, or they're going to vote guilty for Trump because he's Trump, and that's about it. Unless you get one or two holdouts, which I think is just kind of a Hail Mary at this point. It's kind of ridiculous to even truly consider it. Maybe 1% chance that happens. But the effect of it is actually what matters. And the effect of it is that Donald Trump has been pulled off the campaign trail. He's now sitting in court rather than barnstorming Pennsylvania. There's no ground game up. There's no field offices up yet, which there should be since he's obviously not there. And though I'm very pleased to hear that Governor DeSantis will be either joining Trump or doing some campaigning as well for him on his own. They had a huge meeting in Miami over the week. And so I tweeted about that, but certainly want to mention that while you're here, Will.
Right.
And
but funny thing is,
what's amazing to me is that it's just amazing that the Democrats have been able to pull this off, and it's like our country doesn't even sit up and talk about what's really going on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I saw this coming, right? Like, this is, we can, obviously I support President Trump now and want to see him elected, but if people will know that I was a DeSantis supporter in the primary. And one of the reasons is I was worried about this problem. I was worried about the lawfare problem. Now, that said, things have gone well on the lawfare front as a general matter for President Trump. And it looks like most of the federal cases aren't going to see trial before the election. But this one has, for example. And, this is an example of, the stuff he was going to face as a presidential candidate when we knew about this during the nominating process. But now that it's happening, we got to fight it. And I'm glad, very, very glad to see that Governor DeSantis and President Trump are going to start working together, because I think that, there was some sniping going on from both camps, if you will. And I didn't think any of it was productive. And I think, DeSantis has a lot of support in the country. Donald Trump certainly does. And we should all be working together to defeat Joe Biden.
There's no question. And actually, funny enough, Governor DeSantis also has a history as a Navy lawyer, so maybe he can offer some legal assistance as well there. But Will, in just in the 3 minutes we have left in this segment, because I want to do Supreme Court in the next, have you ever seen a case brought against such a high-profile figure like President Trump, or just anyone that's similar to this theory, this bizarre legal theory that Alvin Bragg is using?
Not in particular, nothing similar to this theory. I mean, but we have had similar attempts at lawfare against popular Republicans before. Sure. A good example would be Ted Stevens back in Alaska. They accused him of this bogus bribery charge and suborned perjury from FBI agents to do it. Ted Stevens had to withdraw, and he lost his race, which was ultimately what got Obamacare passed. And then after he was convicted at trial, Judge Emmett Sullivan actually threw out the jury verdict and had ethics. I think ultimately some of the prosecutors got indicted and charged themselves and lost their bar licenses.
I wish that Judge Sullivan had been that same Judge Sullivan when it came to General Flynn, but apparently not so, as you and I covered his trial together, or his hearing at least at one point, remember, Sullivan wouldn't even let Flynn wouldn't even drop the charges. They actually had to go all the way up to the point where Trump pardoned him in like the last, kind of waning minutes of the presidency in 2020 as he was leaving, because Sullivan was just so completely intransigent on this. And what strikes me, and I'll toss it to you for the last minute, is that Democrats will be as ruthless as possible with lawfare, and Republicans seem to just kind of be totally averse to opening up any significant investigations into Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we've unilaterally disarmed. I mean, I don't know what's going on in Georgia with Chris Carr and Brian Kemp, but there should have been indictment of Fani Willis yesterday, months ago. She perjured herself on the stand in front of the whole country. Where's the indictment? It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to your entire state that you haven't solved the puzzle of how to indict someone who perjured themselves so brazenly. But we've unilaterally disarmed in a lot of ways on lawfare, and I think a big part of why the Article 3 project exists and what we're going to do going forward, we're going to try and fix that. Lawfare can't just be a one-way street.
Okay. Let's chat about that a little bit more in the next segment. Will Chamberlain, Article 3 project, Senior Counsel, works with Mike Davis over there.
Donald Trump is at peak "are you kidding me" right now. He has been swimming at the bottom of the MAGA reptile tank, appearing on shows like America's Top 10 Countdown with Wayne Allen Root, the Dr. Gina Show on Real America's Voice. Kim Jong-un's old pal Donald is busy talking to anyone who might sit there and nod in agreement. He did an interview with something called Real America's Voice, which might not even be a real thing. But
what is that network?
Real America's Voice. Bannon's on it. Charlie Kirk's on it. It's a TV network.
It's like a
down market Truth Social.
It's like
I don't know why that's a laugh fest, but yes, Real America's Voice is now breaking through the white noise of the mainstream media with Charlie Kirk, War Room, of course, John Fredericks early morning. You got Gruber, Miranda Kahn, Tara Dahl, Jack Posobiec. You've got Just the News, a show that follows us. It's just incredible. John Solomon. You've got an incredible lineup, and it's starting to have an impact.
Mama Love in northern Minnesota. You know, a collective voice is much louder than a single voice. Thanks, Rav, for giving us a place to chat and connect. See y'all in chat.
This is Rashad from Boston, Massachusetts, and I love Real America's Voice. It is the best place for real news and content. Much love.
Hi, this is Chris from Wisconsin, and I love Real America's Voice because you have great news and a great chat family. God bless all of you.
Hey, this is SEAL Team from Missouri. I like Real America's Voice because it's real news for real people, and it's real good.
But I got a hankering, yearning deep inside for this book called Unhumans. I just can't hide.
All right, Jack Posobiec back here live, Madrid, Spain, palatial Madrid, Spain. But we're talking to Will Chamberlain about the lawfare that Donald Trump is facing in the United States. Will, real quick, because I have a couple things I want to ask you, but you heard the oral arguments, Supreme Court, this presidential immunity case as it came through. What are your takeaways on that? We've had Mike Davis on a couple of times, your colleague, but I wanted to get yours as well.
Yeah, I think that it's a big faceplant for all the lefty legal eagles who said that this was a ridiculous argument and that it had no chance of getting any support on the Supreme Court. I think Donald Trump should be pretty reassured that he will win some amount of immunity, that there is some amount of immunity from prosecution. And it's just a question of where they're going to draw the line. But if they articulate that there's any amount of presidential immunity, then this can't just go straight to trial. There has to be an evidentiary hearing on whether or not President Trump's acts, as alleged in the indictment, are the official acts or not. So I think President Trump's in good shape. And you know, the funny thing is, it's just a way you continually find yourself disappointed or, you know, laughing at so many of these lefty legal analysts, even guys who are like my former professors at Georgetown, who just make complete fools of themselves on national television saying that none of these arguments have any merit. And I mean, I do the reading. I read the Nixon v. Fitzgerald case, which is the case where the Supreme Court found that there was immunity from civil lawsuits for former presidents for their official acts. And you can't read that case and read the logic in it and how it talks about how important the president is to the functioning of our government and how putting any damper on presidential action is both very, very destructive as a policy matter, but also as a legal matter, just, you know, doesn't jive with the general respect that the Constitution shows the president and the respect between the branches. And so it should have been obvious to most of these people that President Trump and his team had a point on criminal immunity, and yet they just pretended that it was a frivolous, ridiculous argument. Well, apparently not. Apparently 5 justices of the Supreme Court are going to disagree.
Well, and this is why we have a president, vice a prime minister, right? This is why, I mean, the founders could have made the United States have something similar to a prime minister, or, just have a, sort of bicameral legislature and leave it at that. But the entire reason, the entire argument for, and it's just to show you, people could read the Federalist Papers and find this out. The reason for the creation of the presidency was to have someone whose job it was in the government to sort of make these broad sweeping moves and certainly be able to respond in ways at times where a deliberative body would be much slower. And so, obviously part and parcel of that is being able to make those moves without having to worry about being sued or indicted every 5 seconds for one of these official acts.
Yeah, energy in the executive. It appears all over the Federalist Papers. It's Hamilton's big idea. The idea that you need energy and efficiency and dispatch in the executive, that the people whose job it is to enforce and execute the laws, the people whose job it is to handle our foreign relations, are able to act. And that's part of the genius of our government. This isn't, if we wanted a world where, presidents could just be thrown out willy-nilly, we had something similar to that world in the Articles of Confederation, but that got tossed because it didn't work. Our Constitution, I think, and sometimes the right forgets this because, we have this kind of libertarian impulse, but the Constitution exists to actually create a part of our government that, while limited and cabined in some ways, is strong and efficient and can do things. And that's the role of the executive branch. And the whole theory here that there's no criminal immunity, that's not something the founders would have looked at as being intelligent.
Right, which is why, and by the way, the answer to the limits of the presidency is also there in the Constitution. It's called the impeachment clause. It's right there, and so it's clearly something that the founders envisioned having come up, and they said, of course, this is what we call checks and balances. That is the check on the president's power, and this is the balance of power shared within the other branches. He can be impeached, he can be thrown out, but there is a very high bar to it, as there should be. And so the idea of these sort of backdoor impeachments, I think, would be anathema to the founders, because that's why they made the impeachment process. If you believe it, impeach him. But, kind of switching gears, you mentioned about the Article 3 project, and I wasn't going to leave that on the table as a saved round, that the Article 3 project is potentially looking at some more projects regarding going after the left. Anything you can reveal with us?
Let's see. There's one thing, obviously, I can't reveal until there's a press release about it. But the general idea is we have in the works ethics complaints against prosecutors and judges who have violated their oaths. And what we're going to start looking at, I think. You're
going to go after prosecutors and judges.
Yes. Right. Both of those, federal prosecutors have ethics requirements and boards of professional responsibility within their own departments that they have to answer to. Judges have codes of judicial ethics that they're bound by, at least below the Supreme Court level. They actually, they are firmly bound by and they have to adhere to. Article 3 Project has already filed a number of complaints like this, and we have many more in the works. We filed complaints against Judge Reggie Walton. We fought, especially for when he went on CNN and started blabbing about President Trump's criminal trial. That was a violation of the Judicial Code of Conduct, which says you should not talk about any ongoing case. Not just in your courtroom, but you should just not be talking about any ongoing case.
It's obviously an ethics violation.
Yeah, very straightforward. And so that it's funny. There have been these left-wing operations, things like Project 65, which is this broad-based effort by lefty lawyers to get people who worked on the Trump election integrity disputes back in 2020 to get them all disbarred. That's why Jeff Clark is facing a bar issue in D.C. John Eastman was disbarred in California, or had his bar license suspended, I guess would be the right way to frame it. Jenna Ellis was censured in Colorado. So a lot of, basically the left has this nationwide effort to try and go after Trump for legal advice. It's like, I'm a big believer, we haven't really formalized this yet, but I'm a big believer that the right needs to not unilaterally disarm. There was a major conspiracy, for example, in Colorado to keep President Trump off the ballot. And a lot of the lawyers who put forward these frivolous arguments to try and do that, we've seen that making aggressive arguments is no longer safe, so you should expect to face bar complaints.
I think if you want to go after Jenna Griswold, I can get you some money from Mike Lindell. That guy is not a fan of hers. Will,